Got to thank Jerry Garcia, because we'd have probably been out of business if he hadn't walked in the living room door that day. In fact, Doc Watson was the first professional musician to ever invite me onto a stage. I'm in the record business for kind of the wrong reason. You have to practice and really focus on what you don't know. Went back to Lexington with Tony Rice. He was playing bluegrass in the Sheraton Inn every night, largely for nobody. It was really sad.
Dawg, I'm so happy to say this. Welcome to the Rhinestone Podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, Banner. Nice to hook up with you.
Absolutely, man. The pleasure is all mine. So, I got to be 100% honest with you, Dawg. When I had never heard of you until recently, because you were brought up on our podcast with guitar player Martin Taylor, who you've recorded a few records with. And Martin brought you up, and it sent me on this deep dive of your music and your history and all these things. And I became obsessed with the David Grisman Quintet, and especially the guitar playing of Tony Rice. I'm a guitar player normally. And it's been one of those fun things where when you start a podcast, you don't really know what you're going to get into. And I got to say, your music has been one of my most favorite discoveries so far in learning about this podcast. And I'm so excited for the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, that's great. We always need new adherents,
I want to start at a kind of transitional time in your life. Let's go back to 1990. And 1990 is a very interesting year because that is the year that you started Acoustic Disc, which is your record label. Back in 1990, there was a hint of record labels and independent record labels to an extent. I don't think it's as prolific as, there's a million independent labels for everything now, from, cyberpunk jazz to, ambient music, right? There's a label for everything. But in 1990, that still kind of was like a revolutionary idea, is to run your own label. What gave you the confidence to pursue Acoustic Disc?
Well, it was really a kind of accident. I didn't really plan to have a record label. I was recording at the time for a MCA, and I was ready to make an album, my next album, and I had made I had done a project outside of my deal with a great Danish jazz violin player, Sven Asmussen. And they released it, and they put a clause in my contract that if it didn't sell 25,000 copies, they could get out of they could, throw me under the bus, so to speak. And apparently at 25,000 in I think 9 months, they came up with that. And I guess it only sold 19,000. But I was ready to make a record, and it just wasn't happening. And finally, I got the word that they were considering dropping me, but if I sent them a demo of what I was planning to record, they'd give me 6 weeks while they considered it. And I know you don't allow swearing, but I gave them a specific finger.
You can show the finger. I'm going to stop you.
I said, well, it's just like all the other stuff I do. Anyhow, so I was without a record label, and coincidentally, two friends, Artie and Harriet Rose, were moving from the East Coast, and they wanted to start a business. And this was just when CDs were happening. And they first thought of starting a CD store. And then I was helping them look into that, and we realized that there was really no way to compete with Tower Records at the time. And coincidentally, I had been talked into building a studio by an engineer that worked at a studio that I recorded my first several quintet or albums of Dawg music at, a place in Berkeley, California called 1750 Arch Studios. And they had gone out of business, and this particular engineer, Bob Shoemaker, convinced me that I should have all their equipment and build my own studio. So I was doing that. And so the convergence of two friends that wanted to start a business, me not having a record label to record the material I was ready to record. I had a studio, so we got the brilliant idea to start a CD company, and we called it Acoustic Disc. And then the magical thing that happened was my friend Jerry Garcia, we had been kind of on separate paths for about 15 years. And Jerry called me up one day and said, we ought to get together. And he walked in the door and said, I know what we should do. We should make a record so it'll give us an excuse to get together. So I said, well, I just started a record company and I built a studio in the basement. So we just went downstairs and I set up some microphones, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. How quickly from that conversation with Jerry Garcia did you guys start recording? Was that like instantly? I mean,
yeah. We just went downstairs. Just like I just said, in fact, we just released last year a 3-volume set called Bare Bones, which the first 4 or 5 sessions was just Jerry and me. And we went through a lot of tunes. And the very first thing we recorded that day when I set up that first day is on this, opens this set. It was just, we just like improvised. We just played music for about 12 minutes. I don't know what, I think I called it the Bare Bones Prelude or something like that. But anyhow, we just started, and it wasn't like we had a budget or a schedule or a list of songs. I just kept buying tape, and we just got together whenever we took a notion and recorded.
That's awesome. And we're definitely going to get into the connection between you and Jerry later in the podcast for sure. I do want to circle back to Acoustic Disc though, because again, like record labels kind of are a somewhat taboo subject in 2025. Like I think a lot of people have kind of discovered that there's a lot of dirty players in that industry. There's a lot of people that want to take advantage of you in the record label business and things like that. Now, Acoustic Disc is a little bit different because, based on what I've seen, it seems about half of the projects are kind of like reissues of old things, or maybe a musician who hasn't, gotten widespread release. I know there's musicians from like Brazil and Italy that you've released music from. But what is the use of a record label in 2025 for an artist in the Spotify streaming era?
Well, I couldn't tell you. I kind of live I created my own little music business alternative universe. And, when I started, when 4 friends essentially started this, I was ready to record an album, and that was the first project I did, and it was called Dawg 90. And the second one, I I had discovered the music of the great Brazilian musician Jacob do Mandolin, who was also a mandolin player and kind of the father of a style of Brazilian music called choro. And I thought this was fantastic music, and that, the world should, or at least the United States should hear this. And we made a deal with RCA Brazil to release some of his many great recordings, and that was going to be the second release. And then Jerry walked in, and so we we just figured that would maybe bolster our, presence on the music business scene. And I had a lot of kind of business ideas about, it had a number of years of figuring out what was wrong with record companies and the music business. So I was already on another path. Most record labels, at least then, I haven't really kept up with what's going on in the record business or music business lately. But, back then, record labels would sign an artist to a contract, and then you would make a record every year or whatever. You either had a one-shot deal or a multi, several albums, whatever. They would sign you, and then if you sold enough records, they'd want to keep you and re-sign you, and if you didn't, they'd drop you. And I never really wanted to sign anybody to a contract, or, I just wanted to do projects that I thought were good or important. So, and of course that included my own work, but I've always been kind of a music history buff, and liked a lot of different kinds of music that was really ignored largely. And so I just started doing projects, and kind of by the seat of our pants. Jerry and I, that was the second one. And actually the first two CDs were both nominated for Grammys. We were batting 1,000. And then we put out Jacob de Mandolin and kept going with different projects. And the year 2000, my partners wanted to retire, and my wife Tracy and I decided to take over the company and continue. And fortuitously, and not for the world, but for our little endeavor, the pandemic kind of shut down my touring. But we had this record company, and by then we decided, after assessing the the business end of it, by that time CDs were accounting for about 20% of the sales, because we had gotten into the download thing early on. I read a book called The Future of Music about 25 years ago, and it kind of predicted what's going on. And it took us 3 years to build a platform. Well, we didn't build it. We built it on a company called Nugs's platform to be able to sell digital projects. And I started making, in addition to CDs, digital only projects that were, wasn't dependent, that whole, the whole drill of manufacturing, shipping, getting returns, the whole headache end of the record business kind of vanishes with the downloads, because I just have to make one, and then we don't have to worry about how many to press and getting returns or any of that. You know, people want it, they buy it, they get the music, we get the money, and it's done almost instantaneously. So by 2020, we decided just to go completely digital, and which necessitated building a new website, because by that time the technology was available so that we could do this ourselves. So, and I basically stopped touring, but tripled my record producing output. So I'm having fun working on new projects all the time.
That's awesome. And I think it's such a great way that you've followed the industry, being able to go into the digital downloads, you know, in the 2000s. I mean, what a time to do that and pivot, whereas a lot of record labels were stuck in the past trying to sell CDs and vinyl. So, you know, obviously this is the 35th anniversary of Acoustic Disc. What are some of the pitfalls that a label should avoid when starting out? Is there like 2 or 3 things you could pinpoint that are mistakes that you see in a lot of other labels, or maybe mistakes that you've made and learned from? What would you say are like the top 2 or 3?
Boy, it's hard for me. You know, the whole music business is kind of predicated on sales and what's profitable and what's not. And while that's an important thing to consider, that doesn't really figure that much into. I still view it from the musical aesthetic side of things rather than this is a business, and I think that's what's wrong with the music business. I understand that that's what, you know, keeps it going, I guess, but I think the music business has succeeded in making music a disposable commodity, whereas I don't believe it is. I think great music is timeless, and so I never really made a record because I thought it would sell more than the last record, or, you know, I did projects that I thought were important and musically satisfying. And so I don't know whether that advice, if it was put into the form of advice, would be good advice for somebody wanting to get into the record business, because it's really predicated. It's more of a business than music, you know, it seems to me. And, you know, most of what filters through to me from the world of popular music or current contemporary music is, I don't like it. I mean, it's not. I'd rather listen to Duke Ellington or the Carter Family, or, you know, hundreds of other things, Mozart, you know. There's so much great music, and most of it is all available now. You know, when I started getting turned on to bluegrass and jazz, and, you know, records were, you know, a lot of them were 78 records that the company would put out every 6 weeks. They put out a new Bill Monroe 78, and then they were out of print, and you'd have to search around for, you know, trade tapes or something. You couldn't really find a lot of this music. And with the advent of CDs and box sets, and now there's so much of this great music that's been recorded is available. Companies like Bear Family, it's a German company that makes fantastic box sets, like the complete Carter Family, the complete Bill Monroe. They're largely country music, where they do some, classic rock and roll. There's another company called Mosaic that put out box sets of jazz. And, if you search around, go to Amazon.com, you can pretty much find all of Duke Ellington, all of Bill Evans, all of John Coltrane, all of the Stanley Brothers, all of Stravinsky. There's just so much great music, not even good music, great music, that none of us had. We could start now listening for the rest of our lives. You wouldn't hear, you'd only hear a fraction of it. So, I'm in the record business or the music distribution business for kind of the wrong reason, according to the music business, because they operate it like a business. Whatever sells is what they'll keep in their catalog. And I never wanted to discontinue anything. And now the digital domain allows me to keep everything in print. It's all available. When I started, I had 78 records. I like to say that and I do collect cylinders, although I don't have a cylinder player. The earliest recordings.
Really? You do?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I hope to get one someday.
Yeah.
And 78s, I've got a lot of 78s. In fact, one of my current projects that I'm working on is the music of a great musician named Giovanni Vicari, who was a mandolin player, a tenor banjo player, guitar player, and a violin player. Started recording in 1928. And he's just as good as it gets. A mostly authentic Italian mandolin playing, but on a very high virtuosic level. And his son Nino got in touch with me about a year ago I had heard of him and had a couple of bootleg CDs. But his son Nino got in touch with me, and we're going to put out, so far we're up to 114 tracks, but he just may have unearthed 44 more. And it's like this guy's life's work, and just for context, he's the guy playing the mandolin in the wedding scene of The Godfather. And I'm going to call the project The Godfather of the Strings. It's really a fantastic musician that no one's ever heard of, pretty much. So that's where my heart is. I would say follow your heart, but that doesn't. That's if you don't care about making a lot of money, I guess. So that would be my advice anyway. But maybe the world doesn't need a lot of record companies. It just needs to refocus the energy. I just think, it's kind of a vicious circle, record companies they say, well, we're just giving people what they want. But you're sort of creating something and making them want it. And to me, if you look at folk music or the history of recorded music in the United States, in the first 20 years of the 19th or the 20th century, it was pretty much classical music and opera, And then in the 1920s, record labels started recording, early jazz, early country music, and back then, there was a guy named Ralph Peer, who you may have heard of. He was working as a teenager in the train yards in Kansas City, I think, and he was observing boxes of records, and he got this brilliant idea to go to RCA Victor, the world's largest record company and tell them that they should record country music, folk music. And he offered to go out and do that, which he did in Bristol, Virginia, or Tennessee they're the famous Bristol sessions in 1927, which are known as kind of the Big Bang of country music. He put out the word, and country musicians came from all over, the Carter family, Jimmy Rogers, the Stoneman family, and a lot of people made their first recordings in a hotel room in Bristol, Tennessee, or Virginia. It was right on the border. And back then, all this country music, every artist was totally different. I mean, the Carter family would, Maybelle Carter was like inventing country guitar, and A.P. Carter found these songs. He traveled the hills with a black man named Leslie Riddle, and go into people's homes and have them sing songs that were in their family history. And AP would write the words down, and Leslie Riddle was like a human tape recorder. He would remember the melodies, and they'd go back home and teach him to his wife, Sarah, and her cousin, Maybelle. And they recorded, they're one of the cornerstones of country music, the Carter family. They recorded about, probably several hundred songs from 1927 to the 40s. And there were many artists that were all just total individuals. Uncle Dave Macon was a banjo player. Charlie Poole and the North Carolina Ramblers was a string band, violin, guitar, and banjo. They all had totally unique styles. And as this thing progressed, the record companies started noticing, well, these guys over here, they sold 50,000 records, and these other guys sold 600. Let's get rid of them, and let's get some more of these guys that sound like 30,000 selling guys. And it just started, it began the process of homogenizing music into, this kind of universal pop music that it's become. I just, and it's reflective of, back in the 20s, it was just a different world. People were, they maybe didn't travel more than 5 or 10 miles from their homes. There was all this music that people played in their homes, and the blues musicians. There was a lot of great music that was recorded on 78 RPM records for decades, and now it's kind of morphed into whatever you hear on Saturday Night Live next Saturday. It's largely about, special effects or something. I don't know. It just doesn't interest me.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I'm definitely going to check out those Bristol sessions. I know of a lot of those artists that you mentioned, but I didn't know that it came from that session. I'm going to have to do some research there for sure.
I think this label, Bear Family, it put out the entire Bristol sessions in a box set. I think you can find them. They were made for RCA, but a lot of these old recordings are available in their entirety. They're all available, but I guess you have to be looking for it. I was always like a seeker. I like when I discovered Django Reinhardt and Stéphane Grappelli, I just went out and found that stuff. And when Jethro Burns told me the greatest mandolin player he ever heard was a man named Dave Apollon, within a year, I had every record that Dave Apollon made, pretty much. And, it's all out there waiting to be discovered. But Acoustic Disc has, it's been a means to spread some of this music. A lot of what I've been involved with is putting together compilations of old recordings by people like Oscar Aleman, Dave Apollon, Jacob de Mandolin, this one Giovanni Gioviali. It's just great music in my particular area, which is largely acoustic string music.
So one thing I'm hearing about Acoustic Disc, and correct me if I'm wrong, like obviously I know there is the big major music industry, right? Like the big players, Warner Brother Records, I don't even know if they're around, but these big conglomerates that, are on the stock market kind of thing. But one thing I find really interesting about Acoustic Disc is it's almost become a vehicle for you to express yourself further. It's almost like a business vehicle to express your love of making music, but also documenting music and also putting out things that, as far as I understand, that you just really think are really cool, right? Now, my question comes more of along the lines of what would you tell someone who maybe wants to start a record label for that sort of artistic freedom, as opposed to, obviously you have to sell things to make money, right? Like you can't just ignore the sales part. Like it'd be fun to just, blow stuff out and hope it all sells, but that's not the case. What would you tell to somebody who maybe wants to start a record label as a, let's say 40% passion project, 60% legitimate business, or somewhere along those ratios?
Good luck is what I would tell them. I mean, it's possible, but it is expensive to do anything really. And, it took, many years to build this up. And we did, I got to thank Jerry Garcia, because we'd have probably been out of business if he hadn't walked in the living room door that day. Because, I had some ideas about record distribution at that. I kind of watched the development of the record business. I produced my first record in 1963 for Folkways because I was a fan of a bluegrass lover, and I had met Red Allen and Frank Wakefield. Red Allen was a great bluegrass singer who gained fame with the Osborne brothers, made some of their classic recordings for MGM in the mid to late 50s. And Frank Wakefield was an amazing mandolin player, and they had formed a band. And I was in a position, I'm getting off on a tangent. I'm not really, I went to school, to college at NYU in Greenwich Village, was living in Greenwich Village. And I was working part-time for a man named Israel G. Young, who was the proprietor of an establishment called the Folklore Center, which was kind of the mecca for folk music in the early 60s, late 50s. And Israel was involved in, every year they would have what they called a hootenanny at Carnegie Hall. And I recommended this band to be on the bill. They would, hire, 10 or 11 acts of various kinds of traditional folk music. They might have one or two popular, that was kind of during the big folk scare of the early 60s, and anyhow, I got them a gig in Carnegie Hall, and one of the main folk clubs in Greenwich Village at the time was Gertie's Folk City. And after they played Carnegie Hall, they drove down to the village, and and played a guest set to audition for a 2-week gig at Gertie's. I mean, that sounds crazy. They just got done playing Carnegie Hall and they're going to audition in this small club. But needless to say, they got the gig. And when they came up to play that gig, Red Allen had a tape of 10 songs that he told me he sold to Folkways Records. They were going to put it out. And I felt they had some important material that wasn't on that tape. And, since I was a fan of Folkways Records, Folkways was a label that would put like 28 songs on an LP. And I told them, these 10 songs, and some of them were, not from the traditional folk space, which Folkways was really about that. So he said, well, you call Mr. Ash. Mo Ash was the head of Folkways Records. I called him up out of the blue. I was just an 18-year-old kid, and I told him, I think these guys should record some more material. And he gave, I had a good friend, Peter Siegel. He gave us 3 hours of studio time at a studio in New York called Q Studios. And we recorded a bunch more material. I got my friend Bill Keith, who was reinventing banjo playing at the time, and another friend, Fred Weiss, played bass. And we recorded more material, and it came out on Folkways. It's still in print. And they added actually material to it for the CD. But so I got into producing records, and I was inspired by my mentor, Ralph Rinsler, who was a neighbor and an art student of my mom, who was an art teacher in Passaic, New Jersey. Ralph Rinsler was an amazing musician. He was a mandolin player in the Greenbrier Boys, which was the first bluegrass band in New York City. And he was he was a folklorist, and he rediscovered Clarence Ashley, who was an old-time banjo player, recorded in the 1920s. And when he went down to record him, his neighbor, Arthel Watson, Doc Watson, made his first recordings on those sessions. And I was 15 years old, and I heard Ralph invited me over, and I sat in his kitchen listening to these tapes. And he said, I was the first person that said, hey, who's that guitar player? And I got to meet a lot of these people just through these connections. In fact, Doc Watson was the first professional musician to ever invite me onto a stage. I was 17 years old. And so getting back to your question about, most of my story is just pure accident, pure good luck, it's like your life is, it's like a stack of dominoes, and once one tips the next one, you don't know quite, at least for me, it's been that way. I never really planned to have a career doing anything, but, certain options were presented at certain times, and I made certain turns and decisions, and here I am. I don't know if that, I never intended to have a record company or even be a mandolin player. I wanted to be a banjo player, actually, when I first discovered bluegrass. We all wanted to be banjo players, but a friend of mine got a banjo first, and then I became a mandolin player, but it worked out.
I love it. I think that's a good way to live life. Like you just, life happens and you react, right?
Right. I mean, it's great to have, a plan and a goals and stuff, and pursuing those things. But for me, it wasn't that clear a path. I had to just take it one step at a time. And of course, if somebody has a real interest in recording music, a record producer, different record producers do different things. They're not all the same. Some come from like being engineers. Some are more arrangers of music. Some of them are just businessmen that are like reading the stock market while somebody's in there making a hit for them. I've encountered all these different types of record company executives and people that work in the record business, and some of them are real talented, and some of them are one of those swear words I can't use.
So I'm really fascinated about you as a producer. There's a few different angles I want to look at this from. The first is that I'm really interested in the range of quality of things you've put out on acoustic disc, because not even just acoustic disc, but your career in general. Because, like, for example, Acoustic just put out a record of you and Frank Wakefield playing, where I believe it's you on guitar, if I'm not mistaken. Correct? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's you on guitar, and Frank is playing mandolin. And what's really interesting is those records are kind of almost like bedroom recording, single mic kind of a thing. Whereas you've also done, on the flip side, one of the things that kind of blew me away about, especially that first David Grisman Quintet record, is just how well it's recorded and mixed. And like, even for 2025, it's such a crisp, clear record. And so my question kind of revolves around, as a producer, how do you think about recording quality, and how does it affect the power and the style and the composition of the music that you make and put out?
Well, I love good sounding records, and I love great music. And sometimes you have the ability to have both. I mean, that first quintet record, I had met a man named Bill Wolf, who was a great recording engineer, and we became friends. And recorded music is the music and the sound too, and they've been equally important to me. But if given the choice, I'll always go with the music. In other words, like when I first fell in love with bluegrass music, I had the funky radio in my basement, and every Saturday night I was able to tune in Wheeling, West Virginia, the Wheeling Jamboree, and hear people like Jimmy Martin and the Osborne brothers. And of course, there'd be a lot of static and noise. But I had... My mom gave me a tape recorder early on, and I had this Wallensack tape machine, and I just put the microphone next to this radio and record this stuff. And it was, fidelity-wise, it was terrible, but it was great music, And that's, I'd rather hear great music than, a great recording of bad music, so... But, when I got involved with making records and playing on people's records, and I just paid attention, and, how engineers recorded music. And when I heard something I liked, I put it in the, remember this file. And, so, when it came time to, when I had formed my first quintet, and fortunately, Tony Rice, he was playing in the world's greatest bluegrass band in 1975, J.D. Crowe and the New South. It had Ricky Skaggs, Jerry Douglas, I mean, these were kids playing with J.D. Crowe, who'd been Jimmy Martin's banjo player, great banjo player. And we both got hired by my friend Bill Keith, the banjo player, to play on his first album. I had never met Tony Rice. And I played him a tape of the music I was writing. I had, I mean, this is, when I was trying to learn to play the mandolin, I noticed that all my heroes wrote tunes. So I deliberately wrote my first tune, and then they just started happening. And so I kind of became a composer. I just had a list of tunes, and but by that time it had developed into a band that I had with a violin player, Richard Green, called the Great American Music Band. And we at one point decided that to try to make a go of playing instrumental music with bluegrass instruments, because neither one of us was much of a singer. And we just were curious to see if that could go over. And lo and behold, it did. And then Richard Green got an offer to go with Loggins and Messina, and I was left with a bunch of tunes and a concept. And but I had a tape of this band, and I played it for Tony Rice, and he said I'd give my left, can't say that because it's sort of a swear word, to play that music. And he made me go back to Lexington, Kentucky with him and start teaching him my tunes. And one day, it ultimately came out, and I had some young kids that were coming by my house on a regular basis to play these tunes and play these arrangements that I had developed. And Tony Rice came out for a couple of days. Then he went to Japan with J.D. Crowe in the New South. And in the middle of the night, one night, he called me up and told me he just gave J.D. his notice and he was going to move to California to play my music. I mean, you can't. So I had to do it, I mean, I had this monster musician, ready to change his life to play dog music, So I there it was, so we did it.
That's awesome. And I mean, what a find. I mean, my God.
Yeah. But I never asked him to leave JD, I didn't, he volunteered. I mean, so, I never really decided to have a band, but, years ago, John Hartford told me, you're going to have a band. I just didn't have that because it just, most of the bands that I were in, it was in bluegrass, and there was always singing was a big part of it. And, I learned to sing baritone, and, I don't consider myself a singer, but I like singing parts, and I love bluegrass music, but I just couldn't really conceive of having a band essentially with bluegrass instruments playing instrumental music, but we did it.
Again, like that especially that first David Grisman Quintet record is just so amazing for the level of talent, and I want to dive into that particularly. And the thing I think that's so amazing to me is, I'm your typical rock blues guy. I did get into jazz, and I do love jazz. And I've recently, just because of you, honest to God, started falling into bluegrass and these other more traditional forms of American music. And what I'm really curious about is, again, like I've played music my whole life, but I'm really interested in the music dynamic of bluegrass. And particularly, I'm really interested in like rehearsals. And I think because it's like, how do you put together, like, I guess like the communication, like how do you figure out like who plays what? How do you play it? Is it just, because when it comes off that first record, it just sounds so natural. It does feel like you just showed up and boom, this music came out. And I know that's not true because I know how music works.
We did a lot of rehearsing. Tony Rice moved into my basement, and by that time I had Todd Phillips had come to me early before that. He showed up in a mandolin class that I was teaching, and he had been a bass player. He was a bass player, but he was interested in mandolin playing, and he was kind of my ace student. And I quit teaching at this particular school, and but I invited Todd to come up to my house, and I was pretty much done teaching him. I mean, he was a natural, and so I had this concept of two mandolins, which is a very old concept. Vivaldi may have been the first, but I like the role of the mandolin in a bluegrass band, what they call the chop. The mandolin player's kind of like the drummer. Well, everybody has to keep time, but the mandolin supplies the backbeat in a bluegrass
like the
band.
boom check, like the
yeah, exactly. The two and the four.
Yep.
And the chop is like a kind of certain chords that you release the left hand almost as soon as you play the chord, so it doesn't ring. It just it's like a drum with pitches, And in any case, I was in some bands where, I loved keeping that time, and that's something that I observed Bill Monroe. He was the master of that, and how crucial that was, and it was fun. And but whenever I play a solo, that would drop out. I kind of had this idea. Well, I wanted a mandolin chop behind me while I was playing a solo. And then I also, had heard, like the first time Ralph Rinsler called me up one summer day in 1961 and said, "I'm driving down to Maryland to hear Bill Monroe. Want to come?" And so, of course, I did. And this guy, Frank Wakefield, was in the other band, the opening act. And he was about as close to Bill Monroe as Bill Monroe, And I got the mistaken impression that they all sounded like this, whereas I was hearing the two best, really, examples of Monroe-style mandolin at the time, And I heard them backstage, which was a tiny little backstage, playing duets in harmony, and that stuck with me. So I had the idea of a band with two mandolins, and Todd Phillips was he was the perfect guy because he kept showing up. And then one day he brought over his friend Darrell Anger, who'd been a fan of the Great American Music Band, and he had learned all the tunes and solos off some bootleg tapes of that. And the bass player was an older jazz guy who had been in the Great American Music Band, Joe Carroll. And they just used to come and we'd work on these tunes. And then I as soon as I had this vehicle of an instrumental band with the Great American Music Band, I started just writing tunes. It was like necessity was the mother of invention. I had a vehicle, I had an outlet. So, and I started writing tunes that weren't bluegrass at all, but they just, came out. And I guess I kind of figured out what to do with them. And then Tony Rice showed up and kind of completed the thing. And these guys they wanted to play every day. And we did. And we'd work on things. I mean, one thing, when I went back to Lexington with Tony Rice, he was playing bluegrass in the Sheraton Inn every night, largely for nobody. It was really sad. It's like the world's greatest bluegrass band. During the week, there was hardly anybody there. And by the second or third set, these guys would they'd start kind of parodying them. It was just a kind of a bummer to watch these great bluegrass musicians with in this lounge in the Sheraton Inn playing for 7 people. But during the day, I mean, I realized Tony Rice was like listening to Oscar Peterson and John Coltrane. I mean, that's really where and I could see that my music, what I was writing, was kind of a bridge between bluegrass and jazz. And that's what he wanted. And that's what I wanted. And that's what all these young pickers in 1975, it was ready to move into something different for those instruments. And we were all pioneers. Sam Bush, and he had the Newgrass. We were all kind of in that same milieu of expanding the bluegrass repertoire to a point where it wasn't even bluegrass. But and when I started the band, I had in my rider in the contract, you can't mention the word bluegrass in advertising this, because first of all, we didn't sing, and Tony Rice was a great singer, but he just wanted to play this music. I didn't twist his arm at all. That's what he wanted to do. But I didn't want people to think they were going to come hear bluegrass, because it wasn't, but they loved it.
When you were rehearsing with everybody, how do you have an effective bluegrass rehearsal? Like what kind of things make it, like rehearsals can get very intense, and there's also a lot of like soloing, and there's also a lot of form to the type of music that you're making, whether honestly any of the ensembles that you have and I've also heard that you're a pretty disciplined professional when it comes to rehearsing and making music. That was a comment that I saw numerous times from Jerry Garcia, from Tony Rice, from Sam Bush as well. So I guess my question is, as a band leader, how do you conduct rehearsals with your band?
Well, it helps to have a leader, and since I was writing most of the material and incorporating my concepts of arranging, I was a little older than all these guys, except for the bass player, but he was a jazz guy. He just liked the experience of this music, so I had kind of an idea of what I wanted to do with these tunes. I had a lot of arranging ideas I guess I got from listening to a lot of different kinds of music for years. I mean, I all kinds of music. I just like all kinds of great music, and there's a lot of it, to learn from if you pay attention. And I got certain ideas from Indian music. I got certain ideas from jazz, certain ideas from bluegrass. I mean, bluegrass is a perfectly crafted style of music, and it's got, it's got its rules, and it's, it goes a certain way. Different instruments have certain roles, and you just kind of pick up on that. I mean, I was a mandolin player, but I listened to all the instruments and what the banjo was doing and behind singing, and there were all kinds of things to notice if you pay attention. So I guess I had, by that time, I developed some concepts. When I wrote a tune, I could kind of had some kind of an idea of how to arrange it. And, there are a lot of things to rehearsing. One thing is to work on the stuff that needs the work. In other words, one thing, I like the idea from jazz of extended solos. Like in bluegrass, you're playing a song, you get 4 bars, 8 bars. That's the mandolin solo. Then you go back to chopping rhythm, and the singers, sings the verses. Then the trio comes in on the chorus, or, there's different orchestrations in bluegrass, like Bill Monroe's gospel tunes. Sometimes he just did it with a mandolin and guitar and 4 voices. I mean, that's one thing. If you have a quintet, you also have a quartet, a trio, and duet. You could break it down. Not everybody has to play all the time. If something needs sorting out, I could provide an opinion as to how that should happen. And, all a chief needs is a bunch of Indians. And I had, done a bunch of session work and played in other people's bands. And I was a good Indian. I paid attention when I worked with Red Allen. I listened to what he told me. He used a lot of language that we can't use on this podcast. When I'm a blanks singing, whatever, I just did what was asked of me. And, I just had respect. If I was playing somebody's music, I just respected the fact that, they wanted a certain thing from a mandolin, and I was going to give it to them. And so when I was in charge, these guys, we would try things out sometimes. And I like to think of it as a benevolent dictatorship, because everybody has ideas. Everybody hears it different. So sometimes people would suggest things, and sometimes I'd do it, and sometimes I wouldn't, But I think it helps to have a leader, okay? Musical democracies sometimes don't work out, or at least if you have, I was writing this material, I had certain ideas of how to arrange it. And, but those ideas were also based on who was playing it. Like I had Tony Rice there. I'm not going to ask him to play like Django Reinhardt. I recognize that Tony Rice was a musical force unto himself. I might, I write tunes in different styles. I could write a tune in the gypsy jazz style. I could write a bluegrass tune. I could write a Latin, like bossa nova. And, but Tony Rice, I wouldn't have him. I mean, he had his own thing totally put together, and whether it was a Latin type tune or a swing tune, I mean, what he put in there, nobody else would have done it that way, but it was great. So I didn't have too much to say to Tony Rice about rhythm. One thing that none of us were used to was playing extended solos. So we'd rehearse doing that, just playing longer than, and when Tony Rice left the group, Mark O'Connor came in as the guitarist, and we had a big rehearsal. It was really an audition, which of course he passed. And we got to one of these songs with an extended solo, and I said, okay, just, play as long as you want. And I finally had to stop him, and he said, how do I know when to stop? And I said, well, just pretend you're climbing a mountain, and when you get to the top, you're done, He says, but then I see another mountain, So, I didn't have a score, because most bluegrass musicians, they don't read music anyway, and I wasn't that good at it. Now when I write tunes, which I still do, I write them out in Sibelius computer program. And, I get together with people that read music, and they instantly can play the tune. And I might say, I think it starts with having a concept, And you don't really get to have a concept until you've been through a bunch of, apprenticeships, let's say, with which I was fortunate enough to have. I got asked to play in various bands and on sessions, and I just paid attention to what the leader wanted and to what the other musicians were doing and how it got recorded. And it just, pick stuff up, and retain the ideas that I liked and, forgot about the ones that I didn't.
All right. So I'm going to ask kind of a maybe more technical question on those things. So one of the things I am fascinated with, especially on those quintet records, especially with Tony Rice, is there are lines that you and him play that are lightning fast and syncopated. Like, I mean, just you guys are playing together at high speeds in these credible lines. How did you guys practice those? Was it just learn it and go for it? Or, I mean,
we'll learn it. And
because it's so tight.
Well, those things are what rehearsals are for. If you have certain parts that are either difficult or require unison, or, there's some arrangements I had where the whole band plays the same line, they all have a certain effect. And so, Tony Rice, all of those guys could get pretty precise, so you just, if the phrase, you got to get the phrasing together.
But I guess my question though is like, do you practice that slow? Like, do you guys practice it slow first, or is it piece by piece? I mean, there's some really complicated lines.
Yeah, sometimes, it's good to practice slow. In fact, I've heard that Chick Corea used to practice everything slow, which is actually a lot harder sometimes to get the timing exactly right slow, but yeah, I still get together every week with my friend Danny Barnes, and we work on the tunes I've been writing with Tracy, my wife too. She plays bass. We, if I have an idea to play a line, essentially a written part, like I write harmony, I write a melody, the chords. I usually write a harmony, and check it out, and I mean, it's great to be the leader because I have kind of a natural way that I might phrase something. But that's just the way I do it. I don't really, I write it out as carefully as I can, but there's certain, dynamics, how loud, don't play it quite that loud. Don't, little details. I love rehearsing. I love saying, stop now. Let's just try that. Whatever, you just got to notice how far you are obtaining the result you want or missing it, and then just zero in on that. Tony was a quick study. Most of the musicians I've had the good fortune to work with are very quick studies, and so it's not laborious usually, but sometimes I probably needed the rehearsing as much as anybody, so you just work on it and get it. When later on, I had a flute player for almost 30 years, and I liked the way the mandolin and the flute sounded together. And we play a lot of things in unison, play a lot of things in harmony. And even though Matt Eckel, my flute player, was a great reader, he liked to learn things by heart, memorize them. I would just show him a line, he'd pick up on, and because ultimately you want to memorize it anyway. If you have the music, it kind of stands it's kind of an obstacle to memorizing it. And even now when I write a tune, I'll start I'll usually make it up on the mandolin or at least the germ, the initial motif or whatever it is. And then I go right to the computer and start writing it out. But so I got bar 1, bar 2. I can move on to the next bar. By the time I'm in the end, I haven't really learned it. I've written it, so now I have to learn it. And whereas before, by the time I just made it up on the mandolin, I had learned it because there wasn't that step in the way of the paper. But, you get beyond those things, and, I always liked rehearsing. When I recorded, I always recorded more than I needed. And I figure I don't like to listen to stuff back. I'll listen when the first take of something, make sure it's getting on the tape, because believe me, I've had times when it didn't. And once that's taken care of, it takes as much time to play it again as it does to listen to it back. And, for many years, I was paying studio time by the hour. So I just as soon play it again as listen to it back. I mean, it's there. You can listen to, I like listening to stuff back the next day or something. I don't, because when I'm in the middle of it, I like to be there doing it. So I usually play it until it's definitely going downhill. Sometimes the first take is great, do another one, but, sometimes it takes a bunch of takes, and then I listen to it later. And because once it's recorded, there's only 3 possibilities. One is it sounds exactly like you thought it was. 2, it sounds better than you thought it was. 3, it sounds worse than you thought it was. But it's not going to change. It's there. All you can do is do it again or not.
Does that philosophy carry over to like digital recording? Like, I'm assuming you have to be doing some digital recording now at this point.
Oh yeah, it's all digital. I mean, I still have a tape machine, but tape got real expensive when it was, and I had an 8-track 3M model M23 that Les Paul told me was the best machine they ever made. 1-inch 8-track machine. And it got to be about, and I recorded at 30 inches per second. So you basically get 15 minutes for about $65 is where it ended up, And so then I started recording at 15 inches per second, and I would get a half hour for the $65. But ultimately, when, it was CDs, it ultimately was going digital anyway. I mean, now they still have LPs, but I guarantee you, in my humble opinion, I think probably a large percentage of LPs are mastered from digital sources. So the reason to have an LP for me would be it's sonically better. It's an analog thing. If you take the master tape and cut it on a lathe, you're not going to lose anything. Digital, the first 20 years was a little rough, especially the first couple of years. It definitely didn't sound as good as LPs. And now, I record digitally. Sometimes I would mix something onto I have an ATR 100, a half-inch 2-track Ampex machine, and sometimes I can, or I will mix something right to that machine, and then it gets recorded on the record head, and then the playback head, I get it feeding back into 2 tracks of the digital. And I basically have stopped at 24-bit 96 KHC. I feel that is noticeably better than CD quality, but there's a point where, you can go to higher resolutions, but they, ultimately a customer, they have to deal with how much they can fit on their phone or their computer or whatever. So most of our projects are available in 3 different resolutions. MP3, which is actually the highest MP3 you can get, and then Redbook, which is CD quality, and then what we call high def, which is 9624.
Is that like FLAC? Is that like FLAC or something?
Yeah, well,
like that?
FLAC is a kind of both the 16-bit and the 24-bit are available in FLAC, but that's just a compressing. It compresses it, and then you open it when you get it. It doesn't. I guess some newer computers will just play FLAC files. I'm not exactly, that's, you have to go with the industry standard, When I started with 78, I mean, I recorded some 45 RPM records and LPs, of course, cassette. I mean, it went through, and when we started Acoustic, this was just at the time the LPs were just going down and CDs were coming up. So we decided to just bypass LPs and that's why we call it acoustic disc. It just makes CDs. But the main thing is the music, and this digital is so convenient. I don't have to worry about how many are we going to manufacture. It's a consignment business. They can return it, they can lose it, they can break it. We don't have to bother with that. And occasionally we license some of our releases to, we just made a deal with the Garcia estate. They have Round Records. They're going to release 3 more LP projects. Not for Kids Only, which was one of our biggest sellers, was the Kids album, and Olden in the Way live at Sonoma State. And then next year we're going to put out the first vinyl, or the first official releases of some live at the Warfield of Jerry and myself. So that's all good. And actually, speaking of Martin Taylor, there's another company that's going to put out this record we made called I'm Beginning to See the Light. It's a jazz quartet project. And all of these will probably be double LPs, and so I'll add material for that. And we put out deluxe editions where, something like Not for Kids Only was originally a CD, but for the download, I'll add some extra tracks that were recorded and not used.
I want to ask you about learning tunes, because I think that one of the things that popped up was that you know so many tunes, and you have a big reservoir of tunes that you can just pull out from all sorts of genres and things like that. How do you approach learning a tune, and how do you keep that tune fresh so that you can pull them out when needed or when people call them?
Well, since I write pretty much most of what I play now, or have played since I had a career, writing it teaches me the tune in a way that I don't know anything as well as the tunes I've written, because just the process of putting it together kind of reinforces it. And, I have to learn to play it. And it's kind of, most of them are embedded there. Although, you have to practice, and really focus on what you don't know. It's like if you're learning an instrument. And a lot of musicians, you know, they'll learn a tune, and then it might be one bar or two bars where there's a difficult fingering or whatever. That's what you need to work on. You don't need to practice the stuff you know really well. You need to practice what you don't know. So I think that's a way to focus your time in, you know, because a lot of musicians, they'll just gloss over that and they'll never really get it right. I remember I was doing a session for a friend of mine, and he had a tune that he hadn't really recorded yet. He had kind of a basic track where the guitar player played a rhythm track, and he wanted me to put a mandolin part on. And, you know, the first couple of takes, I'm just trying to learn the changes. I think he wanted me to do a rhythm track. You know, I'm just learning the chords, and after a few passes, I realized there was this one spot that was kind of screwed up. And even though he had a click track, there was one bar or two where the guitar player, he was out of time. And I finally told my friend, you know, I can go with that, but it'll always be wrong. So we ended up, you know, once I learned the changes, I just put down the rhythm track. And, you know, and he said, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. We had a big argument over that, you know. I think a lot of, you know, being a musician or being anything, it's about facing the truth, you know. Like when I was trying to be a bluegrass mandolin player, I was trying to play along with records. And some of my favorite records to try to play along with were by Flatt and Scruggs. And they made a recording of a song called Rollin' My Sweet Baby's Arms in 1948. It's really fast and really perfect and really doesn't sound like it's that fast. It's just so relaxed. I mean, like these guys are sailing along. And I started trying to play along with it, and I realized almost immediately I'm behind the beat. I am not. Now you have to admit that to yourself. And there's a whole bunch of musicians that won't do that for whatever reason. But you have to realize that your inadequacies and that you have, you know, some musicians may not have them, but I do. I think you have to recognize when you're doing something wrong and work on that. If, you know, I mean, to me, rhythm, it still comes down to the basics, you know, rhythm, you know, tone. There's just a lot of little details, you know. Are you going to buzz? If you buzz a note, you know, I mean, I can make anything buzz if I want to, usually. But, you know, to me, just getting down to playing one note really well and get the most out of that instrument. Sometimes you want to be a little quieter. Sometimes you want to be a little louder. There are a lot of things to consider. But if you learn the material, if you learn the melody to a song, just internalize it, you know. And once you got that, then you can focus on, you know, the fine points of, you know, tone, phrasing, maybe a little bit, you know, and listening. Listening is the most important thing in music. If you're playing in a band and you're just in your own world, it's not going to work. You got to listen to everything that's around you and take that and try to, when you're not playing the solo, you have to be part of the support. You have to, whatever's happening at that moment, you have to be the support for it. Sometimes that means nothing. I mean, when I played with Stéphane Grappelli, when he wasn't playing a solo, he just stood there. He didn't play rhythm or anything, backup, nothing. And every once in a while he might play a little something, but that just wasn't his thing, And there's all different approaches, but you just have to be honest with yourself and face up to the stuff that you're a little short on and work on that. If you use your time to just work on your problems, then you'll solve them.
Dang, that's a good.
Or at least find a way, becoming a composer. I could compose my way around it,
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, that's a great one. I love it. So what does practicing look like for you these days? And what do you think is the most beneficial things that you've practiced? And what do you think are the biggest waste of times in your practicing?
Well, I try not to waste any time at this point, just playing in time, getting a good sound, getting tone. Like I said, if something's difficult, if there's one particular lick that's harder to play, just play that a bunch, isolating the difficult parts, and that goes for a group too. If there's one part of that arrangement or that song that's requires more attention, then give it that attention. I mean, I think it's just running through something without, there's usually something that I'll want to pick apart a little bit, usually, Unless everybody, if you have a band that's working all the time, that's your practice, really. There's nothing better for a band than playing night after night, but you got to get to that point, I got to the point where I would not have a set list and try to do completely different shows for, 3, 4, 5 nights in a row. And just because the band had been playing that much and had been together that long to have that much material. But it's all a function of what you're, I always like tuning. Tuning's a big thing. You might, if you notice something's out of tune, it's either you or, I used to hate tuners. And, it's like a macho thing. If you can't tune by ear, you're not a musician, But I've, now you have got a tuner on my iPhone, and I'll check my tuning, and because fretted instruments are, they're imperfect, and what might be in tune, what one chord in one key might be in tune with in that key, and another chord in another key might not be. You got to keep adjusting things, making little adjustments, and noticing what needs to be adjusted. And sometimes it's a compromise. Sometimes you got an instrument. Well, on the second fret, this note is always a little sharp. So you either kind of tune it a little flat. You have to work around these things. I mean, fretless instruments have the capability in the right hands you could always be perfectly in tune, because you can, it's up to where your finger is. That on a fretted instrument, that fret, that's there, eh? That's where the note is. So, maybe moving the bridge, raising or lowering the action, all these little, there's dealing with your instrument, and then dealing with the music, the fingering, all these. It depends on what instrument you play, but there are technical things having to do with your instrument. There are technical things I get together and play with my friend Danny Barnes, and he plays banjo and guitar, and it's different. And he'll any great rhythm guitar player will have a number of grooves, rhythmic patterns or time feels. The more a musician knows, the more he could bring to the thing, and I like to whoever I'm playing with, I'll just kind of suss out what they do and try to, accommodate. I try to utilize. I'm trying to use what they have, and not, like embrace that rather than, make them play like somebody else or something, I always, when somebody would leave the band, my attitude was the next guy would, I'd usually be hiring somebody because I liked what they do. I liked their playing. So why would I want them to play like Tony Rice? They, Frank Vignola, Martin Taylor, they got their own thing, and it's all good. And you just work with that, work with what you got.
I'm a rock blues musician mostly, and I do some producing and stuff like that. But I have been bitten by the bluegrass bug, and I recently just went to my first bluegrass jam, which was awesome. Shout out Roswell Music Jam, and I was very interested in how it works because it's a lot different than a normal quote unquote blues jam type thing, right? And so my question for you is, so say I hadn't gone the first time and I'm just this rock musician kind of person, right? How do I go to a bluegrass jam and not look like an idiot?
Well, you have to listen to a lot of bluegrass, kind of study it to a certain extent. I mean, the basics, like there's a certain way to play bluegrass rhythm guitar and a certain vocabulary of runs that are involved with that. There's Lester Flatt's famous G run. And so, like, you might want to just, I was a Boy Scout. The Boy Scout motto is be prepared. So, a jam session is having fun, but you want to kind of understand the ground rules. And there's certain, if you're a rock guitar player, blues guitar player, bluegrass rhythm is a little different than anything else.
Yes. The first thing I noticed was my right hand was like sore.
And, I've got my oldest son, Monroe, is a rocker. And, I've spent years with him, I'll pull that guitar out of his hands every once in a while and just show him some basic stuff. Not that I consider myself a guitar player, but I know what it should sound like, sort of, and that's not to say there's any one thing. There are, Jimmy Martin, Del McCurry, Lester Flatt. I mean, some of them played with thumb picks, Carter Stanley and Charlie Monroe, the kind of the original. I mean, Bill Monroe started with his brother Charlie as a duo, the Monroe brothers. And, there's a certain language, a certain style of rhythm playing. And, when I started, there weren't too many lead bluegrass guitar players. It wasn't really as prevalent as it has become. So it's mostly a rhythm thing, and then how it interacts with the other instruments. I mean, that's the cool thing about bluegrass. Every instrument kind of has a different kind of role in the band. And so you have to kind of have some kind of understanding. It'd be good to you know, either I'm sure there are plenty of things on the internet, how to play bluegrass rhythm guitar or how a bluegrass band works. It'd be good to just check in or check out what that's about before you jump in, you know. But, you know, and if you've done that, just a few basic things, then you're more equipped to just go into a jam. Then it's just a matter of, well, what's the chords of the song, and
You know, you've jammed with so many different people. You know, I mean, you've got records with Doc Watson, Stéphane Grappelli, you know, Tony Rice. You got the quintet. I mean, the list goes on and on. How do you approach jamming with somebody new? Like when there's a musician, whether maybe you know them very well, but like, you know, the first time you play with X, you know, great musician, how do you go into approach playing with them? Is it just going for it? Do you have like ideas or ground rules, or how do you approach jamming, I guess?
well, it depends on, I mean, jamming's kind of a loose term, but, you know, it depends on the situation, you know, but if you're getting together for fun, I just played with a man today I never played with before, and I basically listen to what they're doing. I mean, to me, it's either somebody's coming over to play my tunes, or I'm, you know, there's usually some kind of reason to be playing whatever you're playing, but I think listening is the key. If you're getting this together with somebody you've never played with before, I mean, it's usually, for me, it's like you're going to make a record. Like I met Tommy Emmanuel through Martin Taylor, and we decided to make a record together. He asked me to play a few cuts on a project of his, and then he came out here and we recorded a whole album. And fortunately, he walked in the door and said, "Hey, I just want to play your tunes." Oh boy, this music to my ears, because that's the one thing I'm equipped to do. And then he had to, you know, but still, you adapt to, everybody's different. I think listening is the main thing. You don't want to start stepping all over something. Like today, I had a little jam session with a guitar player who wanted to meet me, and he's got some medical problems, and so he started playing a song. I listened to it, and he was singing a song, and I didn't play anything for a while. I just wanted to hear what he was doing, because, you know, I think a lot of musicians, they just jump right in and start, you know, here I am, you know, they're not, I think you have to check out what, you know, if you decide we're going to play, it's either something you both know and you say, let's play You're Cheating Hard, or let's play Sweet Georgia Brown, or whatever, you know. Okay, what key do you do it in, you know? What tempo, you know? And then, you know, you get it, if you listen, you get an idea of what you can add or not, or what would be appropriate, or, you know, how loud to play, or whatever, you know. I think it's just all emanates from that. If there's got to be a reason that you're getting together, you know, so it emanates from that, you know. Like I met some good players here in town the other day, and they're going to come over and jam, you know. Well, I'll put some of my tunes in front of them, and or I'll say, what do you want to play, you know, and we'll take it from there. But, you know, mostly a matter of listening. I think that's the most important thing other, you have to develop your thing. That's your job, to work on your own chops, your own vocabulary, your list of tunes, your chord, various chords. Everything you've ever learned in your life could be used at your next jam session or not. I mean, I had a guy in my band who was very good, but he just threw everything in there. Every bar was something. And it was like everything he knew was trying to play all at once, And I said, look, think of it this way. You go into a supermarket, they got everything there. They got vegetables, they got meat, they got tomato sauce, they got, rice, they got beans, they got spices, they got sugar, but for any given recipe, you only need a few ingredients. You don't need the whole supermarket of everything, So, for a bluegrass tune, just play this, you're not, believe me, this guy, he's not just going to do this, boom, chick, boom. He's going to vary it, but, you don't need, the next bar doesn't have to be modern jazz, and the next bar, some complicated lick. Usually things, simplicity, and that can be interpreted lots of different ways. Like one of my philosophies is try to say more with less, because anybody that's been studying their instrument for a long time has accumulated a lot of knowledge. They maybe learned a lot of pyrotechnical stuff, and they may have another axiom I've developed is, having a large vocabulary doesn't necessarily make you a poet.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that a lot.
So, unfortunately, a lot of musicians, when you're young, like Ricky Bobby, you want to go fast. And, you want a lot of musicians and you have to have something to say. I think that's an important thing. Have something to say. Everything you play should mean something. And unfortunately, a lot of times, what I hear a lot of musicians do is, look what I can do. I mean, that's okay if you're a figure skater or, acrobat, but, for any given song, the 3 T's we used to talk about is time, tone, and taste. And taste is, that's something you have to develop. What's appropriate for this moment, this song, this chord change, whatever. And sometimes, it's like the greatest ball players don't usually bat much over 400, So that means, 2/3 of the time they're striking out. But, it's just a process. And one good thing about music is you keep doing it long enough, you learn these things through experience. And, you can get deeper into it and everything you've learned, you'll be able to use, but maybe not all at once.
So I want to back up just one little bit. And one of the things you mentioned, and you've mentioned this a couple times, is practicing tone. How does one practice tone?
Well, I think it starts with having some kind of idea in your head of what you want to sound like. So it's good. I heard some mandolin players that, I just liked the sound they were making. It was something very visceral, like Bill Monroe. There's something about his tone, the sound he made, and that's what I was trying to get on top of. Other musicians, I may have liked the notes more, or, it's just a combination of all those things. But yeah, and then, having an instrument, that instrument has got a certain potential. And, I started out with the real piece of crap mandolin, but of course I didn't know that. But I think you got to try to get the most out of an instrument that it can give you, but it's finding, how to hold that pick, where to hit that string, how hard to, it's just experimenting, just making one note sound really good. And then at certain times you want to, often the best tone is not the hardest you might play something, but it helps to have a good instrument. But it's really the player that you're going to hear, That's how I got into buying and selling mandolins. People would say, "Man, that mandolin sounds good." They never say you sound good.
Oh, God.
They're giving the credit to the instrument. I said, "Yeah, you want to buy it?" Or like Chet Atkins or Isaac Stern would say, "That's funny. I don't hear anything."
I love it. That's awesome. So, David, the last question of this main interview portion, I asked this to every guest, and I think it's a really good way to wrap stuff up before we get into the rapid fire section. But I want to know, do you have any regrets in your career as a musician? And if so, what would you have changed?
I have very few regrets. Now, that's not to say that I don't think I made mistakes, but I'll tell you one regret I have. When I was 19 years old, I was asked there was a band called the Kentucky Colonels. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Clarence White, I'm sure you heard of him.
Yeah.
And his brother Rowan, and that was their bluegrass band, and a banjo player named Billy Ray Latham and a bass player named Roger Bush. Well, Roland's wife was having their first baby in 1964, and Roland asked me to sub for him at a week-long gig at the Gaslight Cafe in Greenwich Village. I was 19. They all stayed at my fifth-floor walk-up DC current bathtub in the kitchen apartment, and we'd play 2 sets a night and come home and jam all night. And I'd sit on that living room floor with 21-year-old Clarence White, and I was 19. And it's one of the great experiences of my musical career. And they asked me to go to Chicago with them the following week, and I didn't go.
Oh, why not?
That's about my only regret.
Why did you not go with them?
Well, I was being a good student. Maybe I had exam. I don't know. I should have gone, but I didn't. And that's perhaps my only professional regret. You got to keep focused on the future. We all make mistakes. We all, but pretty much if like my manager, Craig, always said, if you learn from something, it's not really a mistake. So, you learn. Sometimes it's best to learn the hard way. Often that's through the pocketbook. You make that kind of a mistake. But, nothing teaches, screwing up can sometimes be the best education. It's called experience. And that's, it's hard to have that without going through it. So I don't really regret too much. I regret tragedies that have happened, but most things are beyond your control.
Yeah, I 100% relate to that. I've been making music about 20 years at this point, and one of the things that I've realized is that things at the time that I was going through that I thought were awful, and I mean, I could tell you stories. I had a music professor in college who told me I would never amount to anything in music, and that I was a terrible student and I needed to give up and do something else. And I mean, it destroyed me. I was 19 and didn't know any better. And but now I'm so glad I did go through that, because now when someone tells me anything, I'm like, well, what do they really mean? Or what's their purpose in saying that? And I couldn't agree more. Like, it's having that experience boldens you and makes you make better decisions, and helps you to kind of, like you said earlier, face the truth in what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I had an experience like that. My dad had been a professional trombone player earlier in his life. He was 47 when I was born and sadly passed away when I was 10. And he got me started on piano. And I kept, after he passed away, I was still taking piano lessons in and out of it. And then I discovered bluegrass, and I decided I wanted to get a mandolin. And I told my piano teacher, I just bought a mandolin. And he said, "Oh, that's not a real instrument." And that's the day I quit piano lessons. And I guess I dedicated the rest of my life to proving him wrong.
Oh, spite is such a good fuel, isn't it? It just makes everything so much better. Well, Dawg, that concludes the main interview section of the podcast, and I would love to shoot a couple rapid fire questions for it right by you. First thought, best thought, and then we'll let you bump whatever you got going on, and then we'll wrap up. Sound good?
Okay, yeah.
All right, perfect. So, Dawg, what was the last album that you bought or the last album that blew your mind?
Wow. Well, I would just listening to John Coltrane quartet live at Grass in Austria. I mean, and that blew my mind. Well, they all, I try to not listen to anything that doesn't blow my mind. I guess, just catching up with I have a huge collection of records. I have like close to 30,000 songs on my iPhone. And when I was traveling, I'd put it on shuffle, and invariably hear stuff that I'd never heard before, because, I'd buy, 3 CD compilations, and, like I bought the 110 CD set of the complete works of Mozart. I probably haven't even listened to a third of it yet. Because I spend a lot of time listening to whatever I'm working on. But, yeah, all the great music blows my mind. But not in the same way as when I was, 17 years old.
Who is a musician, in your opinion, that deserves more attention?
Well, this guy Giovanni Vicari that I'm working on. There are lots of musicians that get no attention whatsoever. I met a great sax player not too long ago. My wife Tracy plays bass, and she fortunately gets to play with some amazing musicians. A guy named Chris Bickley, who's, in my opinion, is as good a sax player as there is. And he plays out of, he kind of reminds me of all the great sax players, but he's got his own thing. And I'm going to do some playing in a few days with a great vibes player named Mike Horsfall. There are a lot of incredible musicians that none of us have heard of, They just, didn't, they didn't become superstars, and they, I mean, Chris Bickley worked for a time with Kenny Rogers, and he did a lot of contracting orchestras in Chicago. There are a lot of great players, jazz players, bluegrass players that just don't get recognized because they're not necessarily trying to get recognized, or there's just very few fortunate musicians that get to be stars, and I don't know, there's just so many of them that I wish I used to think, if people got to hear Django Reinhardt, they'd all stop listening to whatever they're listening to and go out and buy Django Reinhardt records. But that's not the case. That's not really true. I don't think most people listen to music the way I listen to it or the way you listen to it. I think that, and maybe that's okay. I mean, it is okay. But I think most people hear music as kind of a background to whatever they're doing. They don't really focus in on, wow, that was a great bass line or certain things, that I automatically pay attention to. I forgot what the question was, but
No. It was just, who is a musician that deserves more attention?
Yeah, well, a lot of them, too many to name, and unfortunately, most of them I couldn't even tell you who they are, but there are a lot of really fine musicians. I mean, if almost anything, Duke Ellington, probably. I mean, you don't hear. You don't really get to hear a lot of great music on TV, or I don't listen to, I'm not really plugged into whatever is popular now. Like I couldn't tell you what Taylor Swift sounds like, or Beyonce, or anything that's on the top 20 I probably never heard of or wouldn't even be able to identify. And I mean, I'm sure they're fine, but it just doesn't. I'd rather listen to Thelonious Monk or Aretha Franklin or Otis Redding or Ralph Stanley or Mozart or Bela Bartok, or, I could just go on and on. Ben Webster. I love Ben Webster.
Okay. So if you lost all of your gear in a tragic house fire and had to start over with only $1,000, what would you get?
Well, I borrow something. I don't know. I go out and try to find a pretty decent mandolin. I wrote a tune that I tell a story about. I thought it's a similar thing. What if I was on a desert island? What would I do? I had my mandolin. Well, of course, I'd play it. But sooner or later, I'd start breaking strings. And sooner or later, I'd be down to one string. So I actually wrote a tune that's on one string. I guess I'd find a mandolin that worked. You don't need, that it's like I probably have some friends that might lend me something that might be worth more than $1,000, but I'd find something that played pretty good, and there's some really good, inexpensive instruments. Eastman makes some pretty nice, inexpensive mandolins, and if it was a mandolin, I might just buy some more. I might just quit.
I understand that. What is a concert you attended that surprised you?
That surprised me. Well, a lot of them. I got to hear Charlie Mingus one time.
Oh man!
And
together?
What do you mean?
Like Mingus, Charles Mingus, and Charlie Parker at the same time?
No, I just Charles Mingus.
Oh, Charles Mingus.
And
Charles Mingus.
Charlie Mingus.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Or I called him Charlie. Whatever band he had with him, I can't remember who all was with him. But I do remember one surprising thing is he stopped in the middle of a tune and yelled at the trumpet player, and he looked at everything as a rehearsal. And but I hope to be surprised. I mean, that's another thing I think about music is good music should have a certain amount of predictability and a certain amount of surprise to it, like a tune or anything, but yeah, I can't. I mean, they all were surprising to a certain extent, but that's one example.
How do you recover from a bad gig?
That's a good question. Time heals all wounds. I mean, I had an experience recently. I have some hand problems and just some, I'm not playing every night. I'm not gigging regularly. So that's a whole other, I mean, I like rehearsing. I like playing in the living room. I'm 80 years old, so, things are starting to fall apart. So I occasionally have some embarrassing moments where the pistons just aren't firing like they used to. It's, you want to face the truth, but you don't want to beat yourself up too bad over it, You just have to become philosophical, I mean, some people quit playing, like Tony Rice quit playing. He had problems with his hands. I guess he couldn't live up to his personal best standards. And I mean, he never told me that per se, but that's what I'm intuiting. It's tough. It's tough once you reach a high bar and you get older and, it's a physical thing. I mean, musicians are lucky. If I was a football player, I'd have been finished 30, 40 years ago. So I've, got to be just, there's always tomorrow, that's the one great thing about music. It's a living art form. So you get to do it all over again, the next gig, the next jam session, the next, but it can be tough facing those truths.
What took you from a beginner musician to an intermediate musician?
Well, I think I'm still an intermediate musician. I mean, there's plenty I don't know and plenty I can't do. There are guys that can play anything. I'm not one of them. I just kept working on it. Put in the time, and take it step by step. Don't try and, we all have limitations. I mean, some musicians seem not to, but I think your limitations are an asset, because they give you back, you don't want to you're always pushing it, but you don't want to get so far over your head that you can't execute an idea, So I think you just have to, relatively speaking, stay within your limitations, and expand them at the same time, but gradually, just time is on your side in the music world. If you just keep playing, keep working on what you need to work on, what you like to work on, and just hang in there with it and don't expect too much too fast. But perfect what you got, accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, And sometimes that means I don't play that tune. I don't know that tune, somebody, hires me to do something, I try to do it the best I can. But, if I can't, I'll tell them, you need to get this guy, which I haven't had to do that much, but, I could see that, there are a lot of really great players. You can't do it all. I mean, some people might be able to, but, so I've always been aware of my limitations.
Now, you kind of already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What took you from an intermediate musician to an advanced musician, even though you don't consider yourself an advanced musician? What do you think takes you from that level, especially as even someone who's observed so many, world-class players?
Well, I guess the situation that you have to rise to, maybe, when and not be afraid of that. I was offered some opportunities to, like, playing with Stéphane Grappelli. I could have, I didn't think I was, I wouldn't have thought I was ready to do that, but, when offered the opportunity, I embraced it and just worked on what I needed to work on and did the best I could. And I knew I was inadequate in a lot of ways, but, Stefan liked it, and I did what I could do. I didn't try to do what I couldn't do, but it was definitely lifted me up. To play with great musicians is always inspiring, and will give you a boost. I always tried to play with better people that were better than me, and I was fortunate in being offered those kind of opportunities.
The last question, Dawg, is what do people get wrong about being a musician?
Well, I don't know what people get in general, but probably that it's there's a lot to being a musician. If you're a traveling musician, there's a lot of time spent doing things that have nothing to do with music, just to get to the gig, and traveling type stuff. If you're a band leader, you got to deal with a lot of issues that have nothing to do with music. But it's not as glamorous as you might think. By the time you get on that stage, and if you're fortunate enough to be able to do something you love, sometimes you're pretty exhausted, especially as you get on in years. But, get it while you can, have a good time. Don't try to, just listen, keep listening, keep having fun. There's aspects to anything that makes it work, but do your homework, just get your act together. If you know the material that you're going to be asked to play, then, brush up on it. If there's a chord change you notice that you're not making work, just going from one chord to another chord, maybe that's a rough spot. Just work on that.
Well, Dawg, I had so much fun here. This has been a blast. I didn't even ask you half the questions I wanted to ask you.
Oh, really? Well, you do it again, sometime.
We definitely do.
All right. Well, Dawg, I appreciate it.
Of course. Dawg, the floor is yours to promote anything you got coming up. Tours, music, books, record label, whatever you want to promote. Floor is yours.
Well, acousticdisc.com. There's, if you get on our mailing list, every week we mail out a treat of the week. You can download a track from one of our projects for free, and that means you get like 52 tracks a year. You can listen to samples. Just check out acousticdisc.com. It's kind of everything I've done recording wise, producing wise in the past, 35 years, and it's all there. There's about 150 projects, and I love them all. The latest is me backing up Frank Wakefield, one of my mentors, in the kitchen or the basement. Just turned the tape machine on, and I hadn't listened to these tapes in like over 50 years. And my recollection is, well, I suck on guitar. And I didn't remember how many tunes we played, but, Frank Wakefield was kind of in his prime in 1963 and 64. And, that's when these tapes were made. And, there's just a lot there. Stuff with Jerry Garcia, the historical stuff with Oscar Elman, Dave Apollon, Jacob de Mandolin. We put out 2 volumes of Jacob de Mandolin when we first started, and we just put volume 3 out a few months ago. Great Brazilian music. That's my thing now is making projects for that. I still play, but not. I just had a big 80th birthday concert at the Moore Theater in Seattle, where about 29 musicians showed up, and my son Sam. Check him out, Sam Grisman Project. He's out touring. He put together a band that replicated my original quintet with Tony Rice. He got Ronnie McCurry and Dominic Leslie played the 2 mandolins. Sam's a bass player. He's a real fine bass player. Alex Hargraves, who plays with Billy Strings, and Billy Strings showed up and played the guitar. And those guys really delivered that music. They played a lot of my old stuff for an hour and a half. And then I got a lot of my old sidekicks, Darrell Anger, Todd Phillips, Mike Marshall, Jim Kerwin, Matt Eckel, Don Sternberg, and played a bunch of new material that no one's heard. I let Sam play all the old stuff, and that got filmed and recorded, and it's going to be streamed sometime soon by Nugs. So that's about it. I'm 80 years old, and I just figured, I just didn't want to see airports that much. I had too much time off during the pandemic, and then we took over Acoustic Disc, and I'm having a good time living in Puget Sound, Washington State, and, just cranking out these projects, writing tunes. I've written about 35 tunes since I moved up here, and they still keep coming.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Dawg, thank you so much for coming on the Rhinestone podcast. I definitely will want to do a round 2 with you soon.
Cool, Banner. Well, good luck with everything. It's been a real pleasure. And I got a rocky start trying to get Chrome going and my interface. But my engineer, Neville, talked me through it a little bit, and manager, and we got it hooked up. So.
Well, I appreciate it. It's going to make a huge difference for sure.
Well, good luck. Keep on doing what you're doing, and keep playing.
Absolutely. Will do.